Mr. Clash.
Okay. Nobody get up and leave, but I'm teaching this quarter. And my hope is that I don't run y'all off before the quarter's over. Because the book that I have decided to teach from is the book of Daniel. And to say I'm nervous is a complete understatement. To teach this book or any book from the Old Testament as far as that goes. But some of the stories in the book of Daniel we've all grown up with, and the book intrigues me, fascinates me, and has made me want to study it more. I was talking to Roger, and I don't remember him teaching this class. That doesn't mean he didn't do a good job. It's just he couldn't remember when it was, so I couldn't either. But I did teach it in a junior high class once, 10 or 11 years ago. And I enjoyed it then. And so I look forward to this quarter. And I hope y'all do too. And I encourage as much interaction as you want to have. The more the merrier as far as I'm concerned. It makes the class go better for me, but I think it helps everybody in the class too when there's some discussion. So, at any point, if I'm not looking up and you want to say something, just holler at me and I'll stop talking. So when you think of the book of Daniel, what generally comes to mind? Y'all know me, I like trick questions. There's no real right or wrong answer here.
God's in control.
Okay. God's in control. What else? Pardon? Lion's Den. That's a... Yes. Those are the two things for me that just instantly, somebody says the book of Daniel.
I think his devotion, his complete and unwavering devotion to God.
Talking about Daniel's, yes. Complete and unwavering devotion to God. Daniel's, yes. Dare to be. Yep.
Against the wiles of the devil and death and whatever.
Yep. Daniel was another one of those stories. The Daniel in the Lion's Den. Probably every kid that goes through Bible class, that's a story that is taught at some point, and that's one of them that I remember the most as a kid. My grandmother would teach my class, and that was one of the stories that I can remember talking about was Daniel in the Lion's Den. And of course, as a kid, all you think about is you got this guy. He went in the Lion's Den and he was able to he came out alive, and that was just amazing because you're expecting to hear the end of and the lions ate him. So what do we know about the book of Daniel? Some high points to kind of hit right off the bat. What was the book of Daniel? What was what kind of book? I struggle sometimes. Pardon? Prophecy. Who said that? Kelton? Yeah. Pardon? And a book of history. a prophetic book. And this was something that I didn't know, but it was written in 2 different languages. Anybody know what those 2 languages were? Aramaic and Hebrew. From what I've studied, and I'm using there's several different books that I'm using. I found some literature from Jeff Asher. Don't hold that against me, but I'm using that. There's a congregation in Texas that we have used some of their VBS material in the past that I've pulled some information from. So I'm getting from several sources. It's not just my opinion or my thought, but should have started out with this. If anything I say you disagree with, let's talk, because I'm definitely not the expert on the book. I'm just trying to learn and trying to help teach the best I can. But anyway, the books and chapters that or the chapters and verses that were written in Hebrew, from what I've found, is chapter 1 through the first part of chapter 2, verse 4, and then chapter 8 through chapter 12 was in Hebrew, and the last part of chapter 2, verse 4 through chapter 7 was written in Aramaic. How many... I'm sorry. I've been fighting a cough for 2 months. Can the book of Daniel be broken up into separate parts? And if so, how many?
2 main parts.
Okay.
You have Nebuchadnezzar, when Nebuchadnezzar went away, and then you have the beginning of the Neo-Persian.
Okay.
And then all the prophecies about the 400-year period of silence.
All right. Anybody else? I saw 2 different ways that they broke it up. First was they broke it up in 3 parts. First part was just the introduction of chapter 1, introduction of Daniel and his friends that when they were taken into captivity. Chapters 2 through 7, this mentioned as being the prophetic plan for the Gentiles. And then chapters 8 through 12, the prophetic plan for Israel. What I found in Homer Haley's book, he breaks it into 2 parts, chapters 1 through 6, chapters 7 through 12. Chapters 1 through 6 dealing with the certain factors of Israel's future, the rise, the judgment, and destruction of future empires. And then 7 through 12, Daniel dealing with his dreams and visions that were intended to prepare the people to meet the oppositions of those empires. I don't know that to be honest with you, there's a right or wrong answer to that. The more you study it, I think probably the more you might come to a conclusion of your own. But that's just some things that I found. Do we know about what time the time of Daniel of the writing was? What I found was roughly 600 BC. So 605, 603 was some dates that I saw. So, and I ran across this afternoon. What in the list of prophets, where was Daniel? I know who he was after and who was after him. What I see is Habakkuk was before him, was the prophet before him. Ezekiel came after Daniel. So, just a little bit about the book of Daniel. I didn't want to get too in depth and then not have much for the 12 chapters of the book. But I do want to, the next thing I want to look at is some of the characters of Daniel. I think it's important to know a little bit about them, and of at least what we can find. The first one is Jehoiakim. Does anybody know what that means? What it says, what I looked at was the name means Jehovah rises up. Jehoiakim was the son of a good king, Josiah. He had his name changed by Pharaoh Necho from Eliakim to Jehoiakim. And you can look and find that in 2 Kings chapter 23. 2 Kings chapter 23 and verse 34. It says, Then Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim the son of Josiah king in place of his father Josiah, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. And Pharaoh took Jehoahaz and went to Egypt, and he died there. He was 25 when Pharaoh Necho made him king in place of his father. Do we know what type of king Jehoiakim was? His father, it said, was a good king. It was Jehoiakim.
Same chapter you're reading, it says he was evil in the sight. He did evil in the sight of the Lord.
Yes. Yep. In verse 37, chapter 23 and verse 37, it says he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his fathers had done. 2 Chronicles chapter 36 and verse 5 and verse 8 tells, says Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king and reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And again in verse 8, now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and the abominations which he did, and what was found against him, indeed they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Then Jehoiachin his son reigned in his place. He burned Jeremiah's scroll. One of the things I found, the evil that he did in Jeremiah 36 talks about where he burns the scrolls. He returned to idolatry, and one of the other things I found is he killed a true prophet, and I'm pronouncing it Uriah, but it's Urijah. You can read that in Jeremiah chapter 26. Verse 20. It says, Now there was also a man who prophesied in the name of the Lord, Uriah the son of Shemaiah of Kirjath Jearim, who prophesied against this city and against this land according to all the words of Jeremiah. And when Jehoiakim the king, with all his mighty men and all the princes, heard his words, the king sought to put him to death. But when Uriah heard it, he was afraid and fled and went to Egypt. Verse 23 says they brought Uriah from Egypt and brought him to Jehoiakim the king, who killed him with a sword and cast his dead body into the graves of the common people. So Jehoiakim did not follow in his father's footsteps, but of his ancestors, many of them that were evil. What about Nebuchadnezzar? A big part of Daniel. We know what his name means. O God of Nabu, protect my son, is what that meant. He was the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, roughly 605 to 526 BC. He captured Jerusalem, he destroyed the temple, and he carried the people of Judah into captivity. He was the oldest son of Nabopolassar. Y'all just gonna have to go with me on those. when I studied, I tried to figure it out, and I still can't pronounce them good. So, I'm trying to think of how I want to ask this, because the way I want to usually doesn't. Y'all stare at me in curiosity. Did God use Nebuchadnezzar? What for? Just to be mean?
To take over
Okay.
the Israelites
All right.
because they had fallen and
The Israelites had turned away from God. So Nebuchadnezzar was used as an instrument to inflict God's judgment on them. Jeremiah chapter 27. Jeremiah chapter 27, beginning in verse 1. In the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Thus says the Lord to me, Make for yourself bonds and yokes, and put them on your neck, and send them to the king of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of the Amorites, the king of Tyre, and the king of Sidon, by the hand of the messengers who come to Jerusalem to Zedekiah, king of Judah, and command them to say to their masters, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, thus you shall say to your masters, I have made the earth, the man and the beast that are on the ground, and my great power, and by my outstretched arm, and have given it to whom it seemed proper to me. And now I have given all these lands unto the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant. And the beasts of the field I have also given him to serve him. So all nations shall serve him, and his son and his son's son, until the time of his land comes. And then many nations and great kings shall make him serve them. And it shall be that the nation and kingdom which will not serve Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and which will not put its neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation I will punish, says the Lord, with the sword, the famine, and the pestilence, until I have consumed them by his hand. So here it tells us that this is God's, of course, everything is God's doing in some form, right? I mean, I was trying to explain this to, I think it was the junior high kids Sunday, that everything that we have comes from where? Comes from God. We looked at Job, how he had all these things, material things, and they were taken away from him. And in the book of Job, Job says, the Lord, basically, paraphrasing, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. I believe in chapter 2, he says to his wife, we can't accept the good and not accept the bad. But all of that, he understood that it was through God. We need to understand, and I'm kind of getting off a little bit, but we need to understand that even though, yes, we get up every morning, we go to our jobs, we work, we get paid, it still comes from God. God give us the ability to learn whatever occupation that we're in. So that's why we should never take that for granted. So I said that to get to the point that the children of Israel were led into captivity because of their disobedience. But did God use a king that was good? So God, all things come from God. Even if it's something that's evil, boy, that's not coming out right. Wow. Somebody bail me out here. Yeah.
God can accomplish his purposes through evil.
That's what I meant to say right there. Yes. We may not understand that. We may think, how can God be evil and allow these things to happen? He's not. Thank you. Yes.
Well, in doing that, it was also to help bring them to a realization and a repentance.
Yes.
To show you, look who is
I'm-
taking you over. He told them all of this back
Right.
in Deuteronomy.
Yes. This wasn't a surprise. This shouldn't have, let me phrase it, it should not have been a surprise. Somebody over here said something. Daryl? Oh, okay. All right. Thank y'all. I knew it didn't sound right when I said it, so. Anything else on Nebuchadnezzar? Good, because I need to move on. I've done messed up Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar. That means Baal, protect the king. He was the oldest son of Nabonidus. He was the last Chaldean king. We can see that in Daniel chapter 5, verses 30 and 31. It says that very night Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Said he drank from the sacred or the golden vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple that had been in Jerusalem. Chapter 5 and verse 2. Said, while he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple, which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. That's all that I found on Belshazzar. Darius the Mede. He was the son of Ahasuerus. Find that in Daniel chapter 9, verse 1. And anybody that has done a study on this can help me out, because I read a couple different things. One of the things that I read said that he either ruled with Cyrus, the Persian, or he was under Cyrus the Persian's rule. Again, I don't know, one, which is correct, and two, I honestly don't know if it matters in this study. It was just something that I found. One source that I did read alluded to there being an option of this being the same person. Basically, by agreeing with that perspective, and I hope if you do, this is my thought. They're saying that the Bible is incorrect, saying that there's mistake in the writing, is how it was worded. Is it later on in the chapter? It should have read Cyrus, and it's read Darius, but I think there's you can find where Darius was the son of Ahasuerus. And Cyrus, I forget now, I should have wrote it down. It names a different man for his father. So.
I think the two reigned together because it was the Neo-Persian Empire, so there were two.
Right.
Ruling.
Yeah. The majority of the stuff I read led to that. It was a co-ruling empire. Okay. Now we'll get into the good guys. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What does Daniel mean? God is my judge. He was a prophet of God during the Babylonian captivity. Do we know about how old Daniel was when he was taken into captivity? Teenager. That would work. One of the things I read said 14 to 16. The others that just said a teenager. So that's 13 to 19. The gist of that for me is that he was a young man. And you take that as we go and see what happened, what he did and what he stood for. Of course, we don't have any of our college kids in here or high school, but it says a lot for them. I mean, it's a great example for them. Do we know anything about his family? with a lot of the characters of the Bible, we know his father was this, or their father was this, their mother was this. Do we read anything about? I didn't find anything. Don't know anything about his family, really. There's speculation of what type of family he came from in Jerusalem. It says, what I saw is he probably came from an upper class family, because had he been a lower class citizen, they don't think that Nebuchadnezzar would have chosen him or his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to be brought with them had they been a lower class citizen, basically. We don't know whether he was married or not. There's no mention that we can find of a wife or kids. Pardon? That's one of the things that is mentioned that is a strong possibility. Okay, I did not see that. 2 Kings 20 and verse 18. Second Kings 20 and verse 18 says, "And they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Okay, well, he was a eunuch. None of the sources I looked at even mentioned that, so I appreciate that, Daryl. Have to write that down. What type of men were Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? What can we read about them?
Well, I think we could use the word holy.
Okay, holy men.
They had all four of them had determined that they would not follow themselves the king's food.
Right.
And they had a very good knowledge of what God wanted them to do.
Right.
What their responsibilities were.
Right. Anything else?
Courageous.
Courageous. Okay. Daniel chapter 1 and verse 4. Verse 3 says, "Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understanding, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans." Now, a couple of quarters ago, Todd taught on David. And what was one of the things that he talked about King Saul? What type of man was King Saul? Easy on the eyes, good looking. Go ahead, you can say it out loud. King Saul was easy to look at. He was what people envisioned a king to be. They wouldn't envision him to be a scrawny, weak person. So these men were good looking. They were smart. Now that doesn't always mean that's the case. Good looking person said, "Oh, we're going to take him. He's good looking, but maybe dumb as a rock, But these men were not. Anything else that we know about Daniel? Was his name changed? It was. His name was changed to Belteshazzar, which means protect his life. What about his three friends that we read about? Do we know anything about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Anything other than they were the same type of men that Daniel was? They were. You can lump them into. They were without blemish, good-looking, gifted. Everything that I read in verse 4. They were. What were their names before? They weren't They were changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Anybody know what they was before that? I don't think about, when I think about these three men, that's the name I think of. Yes. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Shadrach, and trying to figure out what all these names mean. Shadrach means command of Aku, and Aku was the moon god. Meshach was who is what Aku is. And Abednego is servant of Nebo. Now, Hananiah meant Jehovah is gracious. Mishael was who is what God is. And Azariah meant Jehovah has helped. So, you look at what Daniel meant, God is my judge. Hananiah, Jehovah is gracious. Mishael, who is what God is. And Azariah, Jehovah has helped. What can we conclude from that?
I guess the parents gave the names associated with God.
You know, and I didn't think about until you said that. We can lead that their parents believed in God, and that's something you can assume from that.
At a very young age, and they had very strong willpower
Yes,
and thoughts towards God.
towards God. Yes. What about having why do you think Nebuchadnezzar changed their names? If these four men, the meanings of their names is associated with God, why do you think they would have, Roger?
Just a thought, that they're going to stand in His presence and be called into His presence. I don't think He wants His gods to be reverenced, not their God.
Yep.
He's trying to indoctrinate them as much as He can. And it's going to be through the food and everything else He'll do to become, to convert, I guess, to one extent, but not that, but to force them to be what He wants them to be.
Right. Anything else? Anybody have? Summer? Exactly. Yeah. Homer Haley's book, that was one of that's what he was saying. Each one of these men's names showed a relationship with God. And it's one that as we do our study, we'll see that it was not just relationship in meaning. I mean, they had a true relationship with God and sought to serve Him completely. Homer said, one could speculate that their names were changed to try and break that relationship with God. Possibly create one with the Babylonian gods that was as strong or stronger than what they had with Jehovah. No.
That Daniel used, throughout the book, his name is used, his Hebrew name.
Yes.
The others is not. They go by their Chaldean names.
Right.
And I don't know why, but I never even looked that up back when I was studying that. Just kind of interesting.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that they were less. What's the word? Devout. You know, they just I went along with it. You know, they still had their devotion to God. Summer.
A lot of times, I've noticed when parents switch from common Christianity to Islamic religion, they would change their children's names from just, Muhammad, Ali, or whatever,
Right.
to something that means something in that religion
Right.
to try to bind their children to the religion.
Yeah. Yeah, you see a lot. I mean, you see that a lot in the news. It says so and so grew up as, John, and he converted and changed his name to whatever, and that may have a lot to do with it, and and that makes sense as to why he changed their names. He did not want the presence of Jehovah God, the one true God. He didn't want to be reminded of that every time he said their names, so he named them something that better fitted what he wanted. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Not that I have. I mean, I've not got that deep, but I don't recall. Pardon?
The writer of the book just specifically did that for Daniel, a couple of prophets and not others.
Yeah, and right now, and we may change our minds as we go, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is, I think, just examples of their devotion and what they stood for. But I don't recall. I don't know, Roger, anybody else that was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were they prophets?
I don't remember it being that way. I don't remember them prophesying anything.
That's what I was going to say. I don't remember. In any of the stories that I've read with them involved, I don't recall them.
17 says they were poor men, and God gave them knowledge and skill and literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams.
Yeah. But as we get into it, we may find different. But right now, I don't think there were, Tommy. Anything else? Next week I'm going to start with chapter 1, and we'll see how far we get from there. Thank y'all very much.